He was just a 13-year-old trying to get home quickly through the cemetery. When he saw the confused elderly man between the tombstones, he had no idea his simple act of kindness would solve his mother's desperate prayers. Ethan's worn sneakers crunched against the gravel path of Arlington National Cemetery. The 13-year-old adjusted his patched backpack, feeling the late afternoon sun on his neck. His watch showed 4:15 p.m. He needed to be home by 5 o'clock. "Sorry," he muttered, passing the familiar veteran's grave he always acknowledged. "No time for prayers today." His mom's words from breakfast echoed in his head. "Don't be late. I need help with dinner before my night shift." The cemetery stretched before him, rows of white headstones catching the sunlight. Ethan knew this shortcut saved him 15 minutes compared to walking around the perimeter. 15 minutes meant the difference between helping his mom and facing her disappointed look. His phone buzzed. A text from his mom. "Don't forget to pick up bread on your way home." Ethan checked his wallet. $3.42. The bread cost $4 at the corner store. His throat tightened. He'd have to tell her they'd go without bread tonight. A gust of wind rustled through the trees, carrying the sounds of a distant funeral. Ethan quickened his pace, his shoes slapping against the path. The soles were starting to separate at the edges. He'd have to fix them with superglue again. "Boy!" Ethan froze. The voice came from his left, somewhere between the graves. "Boy, please." An old white man stood among the headstones, his light blue button-down shirt wrinkled and untucked. His white hair caught the sunlight, and his hands trembled as he turned in a slow circle. I can't find her." Ethan checked his watch again. 4:22 p.m. He could pretend he hadn't heard. Could walk faster. His mom needed him home. The old man's eyes met his, wet with tears. "Please." Ethan's feet moved before his brain decided. "Sir? Are you okay?" The man's shoulders slumped with relief. "I can't find Margaret. She's here somewhere." "I know she's here." Ethan approached slowly, noticing the man's expensive leather shoes covered in grass stains. "Who's Margaret, sir?" "My wife." The man's voice cracked. "She's supposed to be here. I visit her every Tuesday. But today I can't remember where." His hands shook harder. "Everything looks the same." Ethan pulled out his phone. 14% battery. He could call the cemetery office, get someone to help. The man grabbed his arm. "Don't leave. Please." Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. "I have to find her. I'm not leaving, sir." Ethan gently removed the man's hand. "I'm Ethan. What's your name?" "Richard. Richard Thompson." He blinked rapidly. "I think. Yes, Richard Thompson." Ethan's stomach churned. The man clearly had some kind of memory problem. His mom would understand if he was late, right? She always said helping others mattered most. "Mr. Thompson, when did you last visit your wife's grave? Do you remember what section it was in?" "Tuesday. I come every Tuesday." Mr. Thompson's forehead wrinkled. "Or was that last Tuesday?" I don't. That's okay." Ethan tried to sound confident. "We can figure this out. Do you remember if it was near any landmarks? Trees? Buildings?" Mr. Thompson stared at the endless rows of white stones. There were flowers. Pink ones. Ethan saw dozens of graves with pink flowers. His phone buzzed again. Another text from his mom. The battery dropped to 13%. "Let's try this section first," Ethan said, pointing to the nearest cluster of graves with flowers. "Maybe it'll look familiar." They walked slowly, Mr. Thompson's dress, shoes sliding on the grass. The sun dipped lower. Ethan's stomach growled, reminding him he'd skipped lunch to help his math teacher organize the supply closet. The $1 he'd earned would go toward next week's bread. "Not here." Mr. Thompson shook his head after they checked the third row. Margaret loved oak trees. There was a big oak tree. Ethan spotted several oak trees scattered throughout the cemetery. His watch showed 4:45 p.m. Mom will be calling soon. His phone battery dropped to 11%. A cemetery guard passed by on his golf cart, eyeing them suspiciously. Ethan nodded politely, trying to look like he belonged there with Mr. Thompson. "Sir," the guard called out. "Cemetery closes at sunset." "That's in about an hour." "Thank you," Ethan replied, watching Mr. Thompson peer at another headstone. "We're just visiting family." The guard drove on. Mr. Thompson turned to Ethan, his blue eyes clouded with confusion. "You look like someone I should know." "I'm Ethan, sir. We met a few minutes ago." "Ethan?" "Yes." Mr. Thompson rubbed his temple. "Margaret would have liked you. She was a nurse, you know. Helped everyone she could, just like his mom, who worked double shifts cleaning houses to keep them afloat, who came home with aching hands but still cooked dinner, who hadn't bought new clothes in 2 years but made sure Ethan had school supplies." His phone buzzed one last time and died. "Mr. Thompson, we need to find Margaret's grave before sunset. Think hard. Was there anything else near it? Any other landmarks?" The old man's eyes cleared for a moment. "Section 60. She's in Section 60. Under the oak tree with the split trunk." Ethan knew Section 60. It was on the far side of the cemetery. They'd been searching in the wrong place entirely. His watch showed 4:52 p.m. Mom would be home soon, expecting him to help with dinner before her night shift. She'd be worried when he didn't answer his phone, maybe even angry. Mr. Thompson gripped his arm again, his hand trembling less now. "Will you help me find her, Ethan?" The sun continued its descent, painting the white headstones in shades of orange. Ethan thought of his mom's face when he'd be late, of the empty bread box at home, of the bills piled on their kitchen table. Then he looked at Mr. Thompson's pleading eyes. "Yes, sir," he said. "Let's find Margaret." Section 60 stretched out before them, a sea of white stones catching the last warm rays of sunlight. Ethan's legs burned from the walk. They covered nearly half the cemetery to get here, and his watch now showed 5:15 p.m. "There," Mr. Thompson pointed with a shaking finger. "That oak tree." The split trunk rose against the darkening sky, its branches spreading over several rows of headstones. Pink flowers dotted the graves beneath it. Ethan's stomach tightened. His mom will be home by now. "Margaret loved oak trees," Mr. Thompson said again, his voice distant. "We had one in our backyard, I think. Did we have a tree, Ethan?" "I don't know, sir. But let's check these graves first." They moved between the rows, Mr. Thompson squinting at each name. The guard's golf cart whirred past again, slower this time. "Folks, we're closing in 45 minutes, he called out. "Make sure you wrap it up before then." Ethan nodded, watching Mr. Thompson drift toward another row. The old man's shoulders hunched forward, his steps uncertain. 5 graves checked. 10. 20. No Margaret Thompson. "I don't understand." Mr. Thompson's voice cracked. "She should be here. She's always here on Tuesdays." A cool breeze swept through the cemetery, carrying the sweet scent of fresh-cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn honked. Ethan thought of his mom arriving home to an empty house, finding his phone going straight to voicemail. "Mr. Thompson, are you sure it was this oak tree?" The old man's face crumpled. No, I'm not sure of anything anymore." He sank to his knees in the grass, tears rolling down his cheeks. "My Margaret. I've lost her again." Ethan knelt beside him, ignoring the damp seeping through his jeans. "We haven't checked all the rows yet. She's here somewhere. I used to know. Every Tuesday, I knew exactly where to find her." Mr. Thompson's hands trembled violently. "Now everything's slipping away, like water through my fingers." A distant rumble of thunder made Ethan look up. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Perfect. Rain would only make things worse. "Sir, please stand up. We can't stop now. You should go home, son." Mr. Thompson wiped his eyes. "Your family will be worried. I'm not leaving you here." Ethan's voice came out stronger than he felt. "My mom always says we finish what we start." Mr. Thompson stared at him, something flickering in his clouded eyes. "Your mother sounds like Margaret, always thinking of others." He struggled to his feet, grass stains on his khakis. "Margaret was a night nurse. Did I tell you that?" "Yes, sir. You mentioned she was a nurse. 30 years at Arlington Hospital. She'd work extra shifts to help families who couldn't afford care." He paused, forehead wrinkling. "There was a little girl once. Cancer, I think. Margaret bought her Christmas presents when her parents couldn't. Like the time Ethan's mom spent her last $20 on medicine when he had the flu, eating nothing but crackers herself for 2 days." Another golf cart approached, a different guard this time. "Evening, gentlemen. Just want to remind you we close at sunset. That's about 30 minutes from now." "Thank you." Ethan said. "We're looking for Mrs. Thompson's grave. Would you happen to have a directory?" The guard shook his head. "Office is closed now. Directory's locked up for the day." Mr. Thompson wandered toward another row of headstones, muttering to himself. The guard watched him, frowning. "That your grandfather, kid?" "No, sir. I'm just helping him find his wife's grave." The guard's expression softened. "Alzheimer's?" Ethan nodded, though he hadn't known the word for it until now. "Tough thing to watch," the guard said quietly. "My aunt had it. Couldn't remember her own kids near the end." He glanced at his watch. "Look, I can give you maybe 40 minutes, but then you really need to go. Can't have anyone in here after dark." "Thank you, sir." The cart pulled away, leaving them alone among the endless rows of white stones. Mr. Thompson had stopped at a grave, staring intently at the inscription. "Margaret liked roses," he said suddenly. "Pink roses. We had them at our wedding." Ethan scanned the area. Several graves had flowers, but most were wilted or artificial. Then he spotted it, a fresh bunch of pink roses 3 rows over. "Mr. Thompson, look over there." They moved toward the roses. Mr. Thompson's steps quickened. 20 feet away. 10 feet. 5. The name on the headstone read Elizabeth Carson. Mr. Thompson's shoulders slumped. "Not her. Not my Margaret." Thunder rumbled again, closer now. A few drops of rain splattered on the white stones. Ethan felt his own hope fading. They'd searched for over an hour with nothing to show for it. "Maybe we should come back tomorrow," he suggested. "When the office is open." "No." Mr. Thompson grabbed his arm, grip surprisingly strong. "No, she's here. I know she's here. Every Tuesday. I have to find her." The rain fell harder, dampening their clothes. Ethan's stomach growled loudly. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, and now dinner would be late too. If his mom let him eat it all after this. A flash of lightning illuminated the cemetery. In that brief, bright moment, Ethan saw something that made his heart jump. "Mr. Thompson, was that oak tree the only landmark? Or was there something else?" The old man squinted through the rain. "Something else? Like a bench? A memorial? Anything?" Mr. Thompson's face went blank. Then slowly his eyes cleared. "The flagpole. Margaret's grave?" We could see the flagpole from her stone. Ethan spun around, searching. The main flagpole stood tall against the stormy sky, its flag snapping in the wind. "And beneath it, there's another oak tree over there," he said, "with a split trunk." They hurried across the wet grass, Mr. Thompson stumbling twice. Ethan caught his arm, steadying him. The rain plastered their clothes to their skin, but neither noticed. The oak tree came into view, its split trunk exactly like the other one. Pink flowers dotted the graves beneath its branches. And there, in the third row, Mr. Thompson fell to his knees again. But this time, his tears weren't of frustration. The headstone read, "Margaret and Thompson, beloved wife and healer. 1945 to 2023, I found you," Mr. Thompson whispered, touching the cold stone. "I'm sorry I was late, my love." Ethan stood back, rain mixing with tears he hadn't realized were falling. His watch showed 6:05 p.m. Mom would be furious. But watching Mr. Thompson talk softly to his wife's grave, he knew he'd made the right choice. The guard's cart approached one final time. "Gentlemen, I'm sorry, but you really need to go now." Mr. Thompson didn't seem to hear him. Ethan touched his shoulder gently. "Mr. Thompson, we have to leave, but we can come back tomorrow." The old man looked up, rain streaming down his face. "Tomorrow?" "Yes, sir. I'll help you find her again. I promise." A black SUV pulled up on the cemetery road nearby, its headlights cutting through the rain. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, holding an umbrella. "Dad," he called out. "Dad? What are you doing out here in the rain?" The man with the umbrella hurried toward them, his leather shoes sinking slightly in the wet grass. He looked like an older version of Mr. Thompson, but with darker hair and sharper eyes. "Dad, you're soaked. What are you doing out here?" He looked at Ethan, frowning. "Who's this?" "This is—" Mr. Thompson's forehead wrinkled. "He helped me find Margaret." "I'm Ethan, sir." Rain dripped from his nose as he spoke. "Your father was looking for Mrs. Thompson's grave, and you just what?" The man's tone hardened. Decided to keep my elderly father out in the rain? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? No, James, don't. Mr. Thompson struggled to his feet. He helped me. I was lost. Lost? Dad, you're supposed to be at home. Martha said you were napping when she checked on you at 4. James ran a hand through his hair. How did you even get here? I had to see Margaret. It's Tuesday. The guard cleared his throat. Folks, I hate to interrupt, but we really need to clear the grounds. James nodded. Of course. Come on, Dad. Let's get you home and dry. Wait. Mr. Thompson turned to Ethan. You'll come tomorrow? Yes, sir. I promise. Absolutely not, James snapped. Dad, you can't be making plans with strange kids in cemeteries. It's not appropriate. Ethan's phone weighed heavy in his pocket, still dead. His mom would be beyond worried by now. It's okay, Mr. Thompson. Your son is right. You should go home. But you promised. Mr. Thompson's voice cracked. Margaret would want. Dad, enough. James took his father's arm. Thank you for your help, young man, but we'll take it from here. They walked toward the SUV, James supporting his father, who kept looking back at Ethan. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, but Ethan's clothes felt heavier with each step toward home. His watch showed 6:22 p.m. when he reached their street. Every light in their small house blazed. His mom's shadow moved past the living room window repeatedly. The front door opened before he reached it. His mom stood there, still in her cleaning uniform, her face a mix of anger and relief. Where have you been? Her voice shook. Do you have any idea what time it is? I've been calling everyone we know. Mom, I'm sorry. My phone died, and there was this old man who needed help. Inside. Now. The house smelled like burnt rice. A pot sat in the sink, its contents scraped into the trash. His mom had probably tried to cook while waiting for him. Sit down. Ethan dropped onto the worn couch, creating a wet spot on the cushion. His mom paced in front of him. Do you know what I thought? When you didn't come home? When you didn't answer your phone? She stopped pacing. I thought something happened to you. I thought you were hurt. Or worse. I'm sorry. There was this man at the cemetery. The cemetery? Her voice rose. You were with a strange man at the cemetery? Have I taught you nothing about safety? He had Alzheimer's, Mom. He couldn't find his wife's grave. He was crying. His mom sat heavily in her chair, the one with the stuffing coming out of the arm. Start from the beginning. So he told her everything. About Mr. Thompson's confusion, the long search, the rain, and James's arrival. As he spoke, his mom's expression slowly changed. You should have called me, she said finally. But what? But you did the right thing. She rubbed her temples. God knows I've needed help enough times myself. Relief flooded through him. You're not mad? Oh, I'm mad. You're definitely grounded this weekend. No video games at Marcus's house. She stood up. But I'm also proud of you. Now go change before you catch pneumonia. We can't afford doctor bills. Ethan headed to his room, leaving wet footprints on the floor. Through the thin walls, he heard his mom on the phone. Yes, Mrs. Rodriguez, he's home. No, he's fine. Yes. Thank you for checking. Good night. He peeled off his wet clothes, thinking about Mr. Thompson. Would his son let him visit Margaret's grave again? Would he remember Ethan tomorrow? A knock at his door. Ethan? There's some leftover soup from yesterday. I'll heat it up. Thanks, Mom. He pulled on dry sweatpants. I'm sorry about dinner. It's okay. We'll manage. We always do. Later, sitting at their small kitchen table with steaming bowls of soup, his mom asked, This Mr. Thompson, what was his wife like? She was a nurse. Worked night shifts at Arlington Hospital. Ethan stirred his soup. He said she used to help families who couldn't afford care. His mom's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Arlington Hospital? When? I don't know. He said she worked there 30 years. What was her first name? Margaret. The spoon clattered against the bowl. Margaret Thompson? Tall woman. Gray hair, always in a braid. Ethan sat up straighter. You knew her? His mom's eyes went distant. When you were 3, you got really sick. High fever, couldn't keep anything down. I had no insurance, no money for the ER. She swallowed hard. This nurse, Margaret, she stayed late after her shift. Treated you herself. Didn't charge me a dime. Thunder rumbled outside, softer now. The rain had stopped. She checked on us for weeks after, his mom continued. Brought vitamins, children's books. Said every child deserved a chance to be healthy. Ethan's chest felt tight. Why didn't you tell me before? It was a long time ago, and then I saw her obituary in the paper last year. She wiped her eyes quickly. Finish your soup before it gets cold. His phone chirped on the counter, finally recharged enough to turn on. Text notifications filled the screen. His mom watching him from across the table, tension lines around her mouth. A new message appeared. Unknown number. Ethan, this is James Thompson. I got your number from the cemetery guard. Can we meet tomorrow? There's something I'd like to discuss. Ethan stared at his phone screen, the message from James Thompson glowing in the dim kitchen light. Mom? He held out the phone. Should I answer? She took it, frowning as she read. Her cleaning uniform rustled as she shifted in her chair. What do you think he wants? I don't know. Maybe he's mad about yesterday. Show me how to reply. She handed the phone back. Tell him you'll meet him, but only if I'm there too. Ethan typed carefully. Yes, sir. But my mom needs to come with me. The response came immediately. Of course. Cemetery entrance. For PM? His mom nodded, and he sent back. We'll be there. The next day crawled by. Ethan's teachers' voices faded into background noise as he watched the clock. When the final bell rang at 3:15, he practically ran out of school. His mom waited in their neighbor's rusty Honda. Mrs. Rodriguez had offered to loan it when she heard where they needed to go. The check engine light glowed on the dashboard, and the air conditioning wheezed weakly. Ready? His mom had changed into her one good dress, navy blue with tiny white dots. She'd bought it at Goodwill for job interviews 2 years ago. The cemetery looked different in the afternoon sun. No rain today, no confusion. Just rows of white headstones stretching toward the horizon. A black SUV already waited by the entrance. James Thompson stood beside it, wearing another expensive suit. No Mr. Thompson in sight. Mrs. Jackson? James extended his hand to Ethan's mom. James Thompson. Thank you for coming. How's your father? She asked. Resting at home. Yesterday. Took a lot out of him. He looked at Ethan. That's actually why I wanted to meet. Here it comes, Ethan thought. The lecture about minding his own business. My father. James cleared his throat. He remembered you this morning. Called you the boy who found Margaret. Do you know how rare that is? For him to remember someone new. Ethan shook his head. Very rare. The Alzheimer's, it's been getting worse. Some days he doesn't even remember me. James straightened his tie. But he remembered you. And he remembered that you promised to help him visit Mom. Is that why we're here? Ethan's mom asked. You wanted to break that promise? Actually, no. James gestured toward the SUV. I'd like to hire you, Mrs. Jackson. Her back stiffened. Hire me? As a caregiver for my father. 5 days a week, 9 to 5. Full benefits, including health insurance. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. The salary details are in here. Ethan's mom took the envelope with shaking hands. Her eyes widened as she read. This is very generous, but I don't have any medical training. Dad doesn't need medical care yet. He needs companionship. Someone patient, kind. James looked at Ethan. Someone who'll help him find Mom's grave every Tuesday. I have other clients. Her voice wavered. We can work around your schedule initially. Transition slowly. James smiled slightly. Dad's nurse. My mother, she used to tell me everyone deserves a chance. Especially those who help others without being asked. Ethan's mom sat down suddenly on a nearby bench. Margaret. She wouldn't remember me, but the young housekeeping worker with the sick toddler? James raised an eyebrow. Mom kept a journal. She wrote about all the families she helped. She was quite impressed by your determination to give your son a better life. Tears rolled down his mom's cheeks. I never got to thank her properly. Then thank her by helping Dad. He's slipping away more each day. But yesterday, with Ethan, that's the most clarity he's shown in months. A warm breeze rustled through the trees. In the distance, a groundskeeper mowed the grass between the graves. The smell reminded Ethan of yesterday's search. Can I still visit Mr. Thompson? He asked. Even if Mom takes the job? James nodded. I think he'd like that. Maybe you could come by after school sometimes? His mom wiped her eyes, straightening her dress. We need to discuss details. Hours, duties, expectations. Of course. James opened the SUV's door. I have the contract in here. We can go through it line by line. Ethan, wait by Mrs. Rodriguez's car? Okay. His mom squeezed his shoulder. This might take a while. He walked slowly through the cemetery, past the oak trees and flower-dotted graves. The guard from yesterday waved from his golf cart. Hey, kid, found them after you left? Yes, sir. Thank you for helping. No problem. Say hi to Mr. Thompson next time you see him. Ethan reached Mrs. Thompson's grave. Someone had left fresh pink roses. The inscription caught the late afternoon sun. Beloved wife and healer. Thank you, he whispered to the stone, for helping us back then. And now, a shadow fell across the grave. His mom stood behind him, holding the envelope. I took the job, she said softly. Yeah. She knelt beside him, touching the headstone gently. Sometimes good things come back around, like ripples in a pond. Is that why you helped me when I was sick? Ethan asked. Because you knew how it felt to need help? She pulled him close, her dress rough against his cheek. I helped you because you're my son. But yes, I know how it feels. To be scared and alone. To need someone to say, I see you, and I care. The sun dipped lower, painting the white stones orange. Just like yesterday, but everything had changed. Come on, his mom stood up. We need to get the car back to Mrs. Rodriguez. And you have homework. Mom? I'm glad I stayed. Yesterday with Mr. Thompson, she took his hand, like she used to when he was small. Me too, baby. Me too. They walked back toward the entrance. James waited by the SUV, contract in hand. Behind him, the cemetery stretched endlessly, each stone marking a story. A life. A ripple that touched other lives in ways no one could predict. His mom squared her shoulders, straightened her Goodwill dress, and walked forward to sign her name. 1 month later, Ethan's sneakers crunched familiar gravel. But this time, he wasn't rushing through. This time, he walked beside Mr. Thompson, matching the old man's careful steps. Is it Tuesday? Mr. Thompson asked for the third time since they'd entered the cemetery. Yes, sir. Tuesday afternoon, just like always. The guard waved as they passed, no longer suspicious of their presence. Afternoon, Mr. Thompson. Afternoon, Ethan. Mr. Thompson didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. He wore a clean blue button-down and pressed khakis. Ethan's mom's doing. She'd started organizing his closet her first week on the job. Margaret liked Tuesdays, Mr. Thompson said suddenly. Said it was when the hospital was quietest. You told me about that. Ethan adjusted his backpack. No patches now. James had insisted on buying him a new one when he saw the old one falling apart. She worked the night shift, right? Night shift. Yes. Mr. Thompson stopped walking. Where are we going? To visit Mrs. Thompson's grave. Like we do every Tuesday. Margaret's dead? His voice cracked. When? Why didn't anyone tell me? Ethan's chest tightened. The doctors had warned them about this, moments when everything felt new again. Fresh grief cutting through the fog of confusion. Let's sit down for a minute, Mr. Thompson. He guided the old man to a nearby bench. Take a break before we keep walking. Mr. Thompson's hands trembled in his lap. She can't be dead. I just saw her this morning. She made coffee. That was my mom, sir. Remember? She helps you in the mornings now. Your mother? His forehead wrinkled. The cleaning lady? She's your caregiver now. For about a month? A month? Mr. Thompson stared at his shaking hands. Everything's mixed up. In my head, it's all mixed up. A funeral procession passed nearby. Cars moving slowly along the cemetery road. Mr. Thompson watched them, tears rolling down his cheeks. Did we have a funeral? He whispered. For Margaret? Yes, sir. Last year. Last year? He grabbed Ethan's arm. A whole year? No, that's not right. She was just here. She was just... His breathing quickened. Ethan recognized the signs of panic. They'd seen it before on previous visits. Mr. Thompson, look at me. He kept his voice steady, the way his mom had taught him. Let's count together, okay? In through your nose, out through your mouth. 1. 1. Mr. Thompson echoed shakily. 2. They counted to 10. Mr. Thompson's grip on Ethan's arm loosened. His breathing slowed. Better? Ethan asked. You're good at that. Like Margaret was. Mr. Thompson wiped his eyes. She taught me that counting trick. When did she teach you? My mom taught me, sir. She learned it from the nurses at Arlington Hospital. Arlington Hospital. The name sparked something in his eyes. Marta worked there. 30 years. That's right. She helped people. Poor people. Sick children. His voice strengthened. There was a little boy once. High fever. His mother couldn't pay. That was me, sir. I was that little boy. Mr. Thompson turned to him sharply. You? Yes, sir. Mrs. Thompson helped us when I was 3. That's why my mom wanted to help you when she heard about the job. Your mother. Recognition flickered across his face. Sarah. Sarah Jackson. Yes, sir. She makes good coffee. Better than James's wife. He smiled slightly. Don't tell Martha I said that. Ethan laughed. I won't. Can we go see Margaret now? Of course. They walked the familiar path to Section 60. The oak tree's shadow stretched across the graves, longer now in the late afternoon sun. Pink roses marked their destination. James made sure fresh ones appeared every Monday. Mr. Thompson moved slower as they approached, like he always did. Like part of him knew what was coming. Here she is, sir. Ethan stepped back, giving him space. Mr. Thompson sank to his knees, touching the headstone. Hello, my love. I'm sorry I'm late. Ethan pretended not to hear the private words that followed. Mr. Thompson had these moments of perfect clarity at the grave, talking about their first date, their wedding, the birth of their children. Sometimes he even remembered what he'd said the week before. A text buzzed in his pocket. How's he doing? His mom, checking in from Mr. Thompson's house where she was preparing dinner. Good day so far, he typed back. One panic moment, but we got through it. Proud of you, baby. James called. He's coming for dinner. Said he has news. Ethan looked at Mr. Thompson, still talking softly to the grave. What kind of news? Good? Bad? His stomach twisted at the possibilities. See you at dinner, he replied. The guard's golf cart approached. Evening, folks. Closing time in 30 minutes. Thank you, Ethan called back. Mr. Thompson, we should start heading back. The old man nodded, struggling to his feet. I hate leaving her. I know, sir, but we'll come back next Tuesday. Promise? I promise. They walked slowly toward the cemetery entrance. Mr. Thompson's steps dragged more than usual, like they always did on the way out. Ethan? Yes, sir? Thank you for finding her that first day. In the rain, Ethan's throat tightened. You remember that? Some things stick, even in this broken mind of mine. Mr. Thompson tapped his temple. The important things. James's black SUV waited at the entrance. He stepped out, suit jacket draped over his arm. Dad! Ethan! Perfect timing. James? Mr. Thompson squinted. Is it time for dinner? Yes, Dad. Sarah's cooking your favorite. Pot roast. Sarah makes good coffee, Mr. Thompson said proudly. Better than Martha's. James laughed. Don't let Martha hear you say that. He helped his father into the car, then turned to Ethan. Need a ride? Thanks, but I should walk. Got homework to think about. All right. See you at dinner then. Dad? Wave goodbye to Ethan. Mr. Thompson waved from the window, then frowned. Where are we going? Home, Dad. For dinner. Is Margaret coming? Ethan turned away before he could see James's face crumple. Some moments were too private to witness. The SUV pulled away. Ethan started walking, his new backpack light on his shoulders. Everything had changed in a month. His mom's new job, his new school supplies, the weight of responsibility lifting slightly from their shoulders. But something stayed the same. The crunch of gravel under his feet. The endless rows of white stones. The way Mr. Thompson's hands shook when memories slipped away. The important things stuck, even in broken minds and mended lives. The smell of pot roast filled Mr. Thompson's house when Ethan walked in. His mom stood at the kitchen counter, flour on her cheek, as she rolled out biscuit dough. Perfect timing, she said. Set the table? The fancy plates waited in the china cabinet, the ones Mrs. Thompson had collected over 30 years of marriage. Mr. Thompson couldn't remember where they came from anymore, but he insisted on using them for family dinners. Family. The word felt strange and right at the same time. How was the visit? His mom asked, sliding the biscuits into the oven. He forgot she was dead. Again, Ethan arranged forks beside the plates. But then he remembered the day we met. In the rain, His mom wiped her hands on her apron, a gift from James last week. The doctor said that might happen. Recent memories sticking while older ones fade. Is that good? It's just different. She checked the pot roast. Every day is different with Alzheimer's. Voices drifted from the living room. James helping Mr. Thompson change into a clean shirt after their cemetery visit. A daily routine now. Do you need any help? James appeared in the kitchen doorway, suit jacket gone, sleeves rolled up. Everything's under control. Ethan's mom checked her watch. Dinner in 10 minutes? Perfect. I need to talk to you both anyway. Before we eat, her hands stilled on the oven mitt. Everything okay? Let's wait until we're all sitting down. Mr. Thompson shuffled into the dining room, wearing a fresh blue button-down. Something smells good. Margaret's cooking. No, Dad. Sarah made dinner. Remember? She helps us now. Sarah. Yes. He smiled at Ethan's mom. You make good coffee. Thank you, Richard. She served the pot roast while Ethan poured water into crystal glasses. More of Mrs. Thompson's collections. They settled into their seats, the same spots they'd occupied for the past month of shared dinners. Mr. Thompson at the head of the table. James on his right. Ethan and his mom on the left. Smells delicious, James said, passing the biscuits. Dad, you need to eat something. Mr. Thompson stared at his plate. We should wait for Margaret. Silence fell. Ethan's mom reached for Mr. Thompson's hand. Richard, remember? Margaret's not here anymore. But she want you to eat. Not here. His fork clattered against the plate. Where is she? We visited her today, Dad. James's voice strained. At the cemetery. Remember? The cemetery? Color drained from Mr. Thompson's face. No, you're lying. She was here this morning. She made coffee. That was me, Richard. Ethan's mom squeezed his hand. I'll make your coffee now. Stop lying. Mr. Thompson shoved back from the table. All of you, where's my wife? Margaret. He stood too quickly. The crystal water glass tipped, soaking the tablecloth. China rattled as he grabbed the table edge. Dad, please sit down. James half rose from his chair. I want Margaret. Tears streamed down Mr. Thompson's face. Why are you keeping her from me? Nobody's keeping her from you. Ethan spoke softly, using his calming voice. We can count together, remember? Like Mrs. Thompson taught the nurses. Don't talk about her like she's gone. Mr. Thompson's legs buckled. James caught him before he fell. I've got you, Dad. I've got you. I want Margaret. Mr. Thompson sobbed into his son's shoulder. Please. I just want Margaret. Ethan's mom moved quickly, pulling out the prescription bottle they kept in the kitchen drawer. Emergency medication for moments like this. Richard. She touched his shoulder gently. Take this. It'll help. Mr. Thompson swallowed the pill without arguing, tears still falling. I'll help him to bed. James lifted his father easily, too easily. Had he always been this thin? Sarah, could you? I'll clean up here. She started gathering plates. Take your time. Ethan watched them disappear down the hallway, Mr. Thompson's sobs fading to whimpers. Should I help? He asked his mom. Start with the tablecloth. Crystal in the sink, not the dishwasher. They worked in silence, erasing evidence of the broken dinner. His mom's pot roast cooled on the counter, barely touched. James returned 15 minutes later, his shirt wet with tears. He's asleep. He sank into a kitchen chair. The medication worked fast this time. I'm sorry, Ethan's mom said. I shouldn't have corrected him about Margaret. No, you did everything right. James rubbed his face. It's getting worse. That's what I wanted to talk about. She sat down across from him. What do you mean? The doctors. James pulled an envelope from his pocket. They say he needs more care than we can give him. 24-hour supervision. Nurses. Security to keep him from wandering. A facility? Her voice cracked. The best in Virginia. Private rooms, gardens. He slid some papers across the table. They have an opening next month. Ethan's stomach dropped. But what about our Tuesday visits? The facility is 2 hours away. James wouldn't meet their eyes. Near my house in Richmond. 2 hours. Ethan stepped forward. But I promised him. Every Tuesday. Ethan. His mom's tone held warning. No. He remembers me. He remembers the rain and counting and everything. Which is why this is so hard. James finally looked up, his eyes red. But he needs more than we can give him. The doctors say. They say he might not remember any of us soon anyway. The kitchen clock ticked loudly. Somewhere upstairs, Mr. Thompson slept, probably dreaming of Margaret. When? Ethan's mom asked quietly. 3 weeks. They'll hold the spot until then. She nodded, practical as always. I'll need reference letters. For my next job search. What? No. James straightened. Sarah, I want you to come too. Work at the facility. Same salary, better benefits. Richmond has good schools, Ethan. Richmond? She gripped the table edge. We can't just move. Why not? What's keeping you here? Our life is here. Ethan's school, our apartment, an apartment you can barely afford. A school district that's underfunded. James leaned forward. Sarah, let me help. Like Mom helped you all those years ago. Ethan watched his mother's face. Saw the moment possibility overcame fear. We need time, she whispered. To think. Of course. James stood up. I should get back upstairs. Make sure he's still sleeping. They watched him go. The kitchen smelled like cooling pot roast and unspoken words. Mom? Not tonight, baby. She touched his cheek. We'll talk tomorrow. But Ethan couldn't wait. What about our promises? To Mr. Thompson? To Mrs. Thompson's grave? Sometimes keeping one promise means breaking another. She started wrapping the untouched food. Sometimes love means making impossible choices. Upstairs, a door clicked shut. James checking on his father. On a man who might not remember any of them soon. The important things stuck, Mr. Thompson had said, even in broken minds. But for how long? Ethan lay in his bed that night, staring at the water stains on his apartment ceiling. 3 weeks. 21 days. 3 more Tuesdays. His mom's voice drifted through the thin walls. She was on the phone with Mrs. Rodriguez. I don't know what to do, she said softly. It's a good opportunity, but Ethan, he pulled his pillow over his head. Didn't want to hear the rest. His phone lit up on the nightstand. A text from James. You awake? Yes, he typed back. Can we talk tomorrow? Before school? I'll pick you up. Ethan stared at the message. Part of him wanted to say no, to be angry, to blame James for everything. Okay, he said instead. Morning came too quickly. James's black SUV idled outside their apartment building at 7 a.m. Ethan's mom watched from the window as he climbed in. Your mom told me you haven't said a word since last night, James said as they pulled away. Ethan shrugged, watching his neighborhood pass by. Dad asked about you this morning. That made him turn. He's awake. The medication wore off. He wanted to know if you were coming for Tuesday visit. What did you tell him? That it's Thursday. James stopped at a red light. He didn't believe me. They drove in silence for a while. James took a route Ethan didn't recognize. Where are we going? School's the other way. I want to show you something first. They pulled into Arlington Hospital's parking lot. The building loomed gray against the morning sky. Why are we here? Come on. James led him through automatic doors, past bustling nurses and beeping machines. The pediatric wing looked newer than the rest. Bright colors on the walls. Children's artwork everywhere. This way. James stopped at a door marked Thompson Memorial Wing. What is this? Mom's legacy. James touched the plaque beside the door. She left money to build this wing. For families who couldn't afford care. Inside, the halls were quiet. A few parents dozed in comfortable chairs while nurses moved softly between rooms. She believed everyone deserved help, James said. Even when they couldn't pay for it. Like when she helped me and Mom. Exactly. They stopped at a window overlooking a small garden. You know what her biggest regret was? Ethan shook his head. That she couldn't help more people. That there were always more families struggling than she could reach. A young mother walked past, carrying a sleeping toddler. Dark circles under her eyes. Worn shoes. Dad's facility. James continued. They have a charity program. 10 beds reserved for patients whose families can't afford care. Like Mr. Thompson's wing here? Mom would have liked that. James turned to face him. But they need someone to run it. Someone who understands what it's like to need help. Someone patient, kind. Ethan's throat tightened. My mom? Yes. Not just as Dad's caregiver. As the program director. But she's not a nurse. Neither was Mom at first. She went to night school. Got her degree while working days. Morning sunlight streamed through the window. A nurse pushed a wheelchair past, chatting softly with her elderly patient. Would Ethan swallowed hard. Would they help Mom go to school too? Full scholarship. Part of the job offer. James checked his watch. We should get you to class? The drive to school passed in blur. Just before Ethan got out, James spoke again. Mom kept every thank you note she ever received. 23 boxes in their attic. Dad used to tease her about it. Does he remember them? Sometimes. On good days. James gripped the steering wheel tighter. The facility? They'll take good care of him. But he needs more than care. He needs people who understand that kindness matters. That helping others matters. Like Mrs. Thompson did. Like you did. That day in the rain. The first bell rang. Ethan grabbed his backpack. Think about it, James said. Talk to your mom. Whatever you decide, it's okay. But it wasn't okay. None of it was okay. Ethan walked into school, past groups of laughing students. His teacher droned about algebra, words that didn't matter. At lunch, he sat alone, pulled out his phone, typed, and deleted 5 different messages to his mom. Finally, can we visit Mrs. Thompson's grave after school? Her reply came quickly. Of course, baby. The cemetery felt different in the afternoon sun. No rain, no confusion, just rows of white stones and difficult truths. His mom waited while he knelt by the grave, while he traced the words, beloved wife and healer. She helped us, he said finally. Yes, she did. And now we help Mr. Thompson. We try. Ethan stood up, grass stains on his jeans. If we move, could we still visit? Sometimes. Every chance we get. She pulled him close. And maybe we could help other families too. Like she did. The program James talked about. He told you? This morning, at the hospital, Ethan looked back at the grave. There's a whole wing named after her there. I know. I used to walk past it when you were little. After she helped us, his mom wiped her eyes. I always wanted to do something like that. Help people who needed it. Like being a nurse? Maybe. If I went back to school. The sun dipped lower. The same sun that had watched him help Mr. Thompson in the rain. That had seen kindness ripple outward, touching life after life. Mom, I think Mrs. Thompson would like that. Us helping other families. She kissed the top of his head. Yeah. He took one last look at the grave. But can we still come here? Until they move him. Every day if you want. They walked back to Mrs. Rodriguez's borrowed car. Behind them, the cemetery stretched endless and eternal. Each stone a story. Each story a chance to help. Like ripples in a pond. The next 2 weeks blurred together. Mr. Thompson had good days and bad days. On good days, he remembered Ethan, remembered their Tuesday visits, laughed at dinner. On bad days, he searched the house calling for Margaret, fought against his medication, cried until exhaustion took him. Today was a bad day. He's not eating, Ethan's mom said into the phone. No, James, I've tried everything. Yes, even the pudding. I know the facility needs his medical records. Yes, I'll fax them again. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, pushing cereal around his bowl. They'd started packing their apartment yesterday. Boxes everywhere, their life slowly disappearing into cardboard. The moving truck's confirmed for next week, his mom continued. No, don't worry about the deposit. We can. Yes, I know you want to help, but. A crash from upstairs cut her off. Mr. Thompson's voice, raised in confusion. I have to go. He's up. She hung up, already moving toward the stairs. Ethan, you'll be late for school. I can stay. Help with him? No. Go to school. She touched his cheek. Last week here. Make it count. The crash came again. Louder. Margaret. Mr. Thompson's voice cracked with desperation. Where are you? Coming, Richard. She hurried upstairs. Ethan dumped his cereal, grabbed his backpack. The front door felt heavier today. School passed in a haze. His teachers knew he was leaving, gave him sympathetic looks. His classmates had already started pulling away, the way kids do when they know you're not staying. His phone buzzed during lunch. Mom had to call James. Bad episode. Coming home early? On my way, he typed back. The hospital wing's business card sat in his wallet, worn from being handled. Thompson Memorial Wing, his mom's future office, maybe, if everything worked out. He took the cemetery shortcut home. Couldn't help it. The guard waved from his cart. "No, Mr. Thompson today?" "Bad day," Ethan said. "Those happen. Tell him we miss him." Mrs. Thompson's grave looked different in the afternoon light. Someone had left fresh pink roses. James must have visited. "We're trying," Ethan told the stone. "But it's hard. He misses you so much." The stone offered no answers. Just sun-warmed silence. Mr. Thompson's house was quiet when he arrived. Too quiet. "Mom? Up here." Her voice came from the master bedroom. "Be careful. There's glass." Mr. Thompson lay in bed, sedated. A broken picture frame lay near the door. Margaret on their wedding day, smiling in white lace. What happened? His mom gathered glass shards carefully. He found her old robe in the closet. Started saying she'd just worn it, that she must be here somewhere. She dumped the glass in a trash bag. When I tried to explain, he got upset. "Did he?" Ethan saw the red mark on her arm. "Did he hurt you?" "No, baby. Just knocked some things over." But she pulled her sleeve down quickly. "James is coming. We need to pack the rest of the photos." "All of them?" "Doctor's orders. Says familiar things might upset him at the facility." She tried to smile. "Fresh start, right?" But her hands shook as she picked up another frame. They worked silently, wrapping each photo in bubble wrap. Mr. Thompson and Margaret at their son's graduation. Family beach trips. Hospital Christmas parties. He proposed to her there, a quiet voice said. They turned. James stood in the doorway, suit rumpled like he'd driven fast. At that Christmas party, he continued, Mom was working. Dad brought a ring and fake medical charts. Got down on one knee right in the emergency room. Ethan's mom wiped her eyes. That sounds like her. Working even on Christmas. She never stopped. James picked up the wedding photo, glass crunching under his shoes. Even after retirement, always finding someone else to help. Mr. Thompson stirred in his sleep, mumbled something that might have been Margaret. The facility called, James said softly. They can take him next week. Earlier than planned. That's good, Ethan's mom said. Right? Yeah, good. James set the photo down carefully. Dad's lawyer is bringing papers tomorrow. For the house. Papers? Putting it in a trust? For the memorial program. He straightened his tie. Mom would have wanted that. Through the window, Ethan watched the sun set. The same sun that had watched him help Mr. Thompson in the rain. That had seen kindness ripple outward, touching life after life. I have something for you, James said. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. Well, for both of you, Ethan's mom took it slowly. Her hands still shook. Inside was a key. And a photo, the Thompson Memorial Wing on its opening day. Margaret cutting the ribbon, smiling that same smile from the wedding photo. Welcome to the team, James said. Program director. His mom sat down hard on the bed. Mr. Thompson didn't stir. But the interview, the board, was yesterday. While you were handling Dad's episode, James smiled slightly. They saw your paperwork, your references, but mostly they saw how you handled today. Patience, kindness. Even when it's hard, James, Mom will be proud. He touched the key in her hand. Of both of you, Mr. Thompson's breathing changed. Lighter, the medication wearing off. I should go, James said. Early meeting tomorrow. He swallowed hard. You'll call if? We've got him, Ethan's mom promised. Go. They watched James leave. Watched the sun sink below the horizon. Watched Mr. Thompson's face for signs of waking. One more week, his mom whispered. One more Tuesday, Ethan added. She pulled him close, the key pressing between them. Sharp edges of possibility, of change, of ripples spreading outward, touching life after life. Just like Margaret had done, just like they would do. Mr. Thompson stirred again, opened his eyes. Sarah? His voice rasped. Is it time for coffee? Yes, Richard. She squeezed Ethan's shoulder. It's time for coffee. The morning of their last Tuesday dawned clear and cool. Ethan woke early, before his mom's alarm. The apartment echoed with emptiness, most of their belongings already packed in boxes. His old sneakers waited by the door. He'd saved them for today. Seemed right somehow. Ready? His mom stood in the kitchen, 2 travel mugs of coffee in her hands. Is Mr. Thompson? James said he had a good morning. Remembers we're coming. They drove to the cemetery in Mrs. Rodriguez's Honda. One last time. Tomorrow, the car would go back to its owner. Tomorrow, they'd follow the moving truck to Richmond. Mr. Thompson waited at the cemetery entrance, James beside him. The guard's golf cart idled nearby. Thought you might want to ride today, the guard said. Special occasion. Mr. Thompson wore his blue button-down, pressed perfect, his hands steady for once. Ethan. He smiled, clear-eyed. Is it Tuesday? Yes, sir. Last Tuesday. Ah. Something flickered in his face. The facility, right? James helped him into the golf cart. They rode in silence through the rows of white stones, past the first oak tree where they'd searched in the rain, past the flagpole that had finally led them home. Mrs. Thompson's grave waited, pink roses fresh against white marble. I'll wait here, the guard said softly. Mr. Thompson stood slowly, refusing help, walked the last few steps alone. Hello, my love. He knelt carefully in the grass. I'm sorry I won't be coming as often now. But Sarah and Ethan, they'll visit you. Tell you how I'm doing. Ethan wiped his eyes. His mom squeezed his shoulder. Remember that night in the ER? Mr. Thompson continued. Christmas Eve. You were so busy. Hadn't even noticed my fake medical charts. He laughed softly. But you noticed that little boy with pneumonia. His mother couldn't pay. You stayed 4 hours past your shift. That was the night Dad proposed, James whispered to Ethan. Right there in the emergency room. You always saw people. Mr. Thompson touched the stone. Really saw them. Their pain. Their needs. Their worth. His voice cracked. I'm trying to see them too. Even through this fog in my mind, the morning sun warmed the grass. Birds sang in the oak tree. The program will help people, Mr. Thompson said. Like you helped that little boy. His mother. All the others. He looked up at Ethan's mom. Sarah will make sure of it. Yes, sir. Her voice shook. I promise. And Ethan, Mr. Thompson smiled. You saw me. That day in the rain. When I was lost. You saw me. You remembered that? Some things stick. The important things. He struggled to his feet. James moved to help, but he waved him off. Margaret would be proud of you. Both of you. From his pocket, he pulled something small. A silver pendant on a chain. She wore this at work, he said. Said it reminded her why she became a nurse. He held it out to Ethan's mom. It should be yours now. The pendant caught the sun, a simple heart, well worn from years of nervous fingers. I can't. Please. Mr. Thompson pressed it into her hand. She wanted you to have it. To remind you. Remind me that kindness ripples. His eyes clouded slightly. Did I tell you about the little boy? In the ER. Yes, Dad. James stepped forward. You told us? Good. That's good. Mr. Thompson looked at the grave again. Is it Tuesday? Yes, sir. Ethan's voice cracked. Last Tuesday. Ah, the facility. Right? He touched the stone one final time. Goodbye, my love. Thank you for teaching me to see. The guard brought the cart around. They rode back in silence, morning sun warming their shoulders. At the entrance, James helped Mr. Thompson into the SUV. I'll get him settled at home. Meet you there for lunch? Ethan's mom nodded, Margaret's pendant cool in her hand. They watched the SUV pull away. Watched until it disappeared around the corner. Mom? Can we walk back? One last time? They took the gravel path, past the guard's wave, past the endless rows of white stones. Each one a story. Each story a chance to help. Will it be different? Ethan asked. In Richmond? Some things will be. She touched the pendant. But the important things, they'll stay the same. The morning sun climbed higher. The same sun that had watched him help Mr. Thompson in the rain. That had seen kindness ripple outward, touching life after life. Tomorrow would bring moving trucks and new beginnings. Tonight would bring goodbyes and promises to visit. But right now, in this moment, they walked the familiar path together. Mother and son. Past and future. Memory and hope. Like ripples in a pond. Behind them, pink roses nodded in the breeze. Margaret Thompson's grave caught the sunlight, words etched deep in stone. Beloved wife and healer. And below, in smaller letters, she taught us how to see.